Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at gathering the outsiders. That'll be First Chronicles chapter 12. In our walk through First Chronicles, the first 9 chapters were dealing with genealogies, and then we had the death of Saul in chapter 10. And the rest of the section of First Chronicles is taken up with the reign of King David. We have his mighty men in chapters 11 and 12, and then the ark and things dealing with the Ark of the Covenant and worship in chapters 13 through 16. Covenant promises, chapters 17 through 27, large section. And then the site of the temple is chosen in chapters 28 and 29. Notice we're in chapter 12, and that's actually 2 chapters there that were together. Chapter 11 we saw last time, David's mighty men in action. And now as we come to chapter 12, there's still some of those mighty men, but it's other mighty men who weren't with David originally, but now we see a movement as these other mighty men begin to recognize him. Chapter 12, verse 1, now these are the ones who came to David at Ziklag. Now, Ziklag was that Philistine city. Remember, David for a time had gone over to the Philistines, and he had, he had said he was on the outs with Saul, which was true. Said he was an enemy of Saul, which, from David's point of view, wasn't true. But he was playing a part. And they had given him the city of Ziklag, which was sort of one of those cities halfway between the Philistine territory and halfway between the Israelite territory, sort of a border city. And here are these ones who came to David at Ziklag while he was still restricted because of Saul, the son of Kish, and they were among the mighty men who helped him in war. So he gets some recruits while he's there. They hadn't been with him earlier, but now they come. Verse 2, they were equipped with bows, using both the right hand and the left hand to sling stones and to shoot arrows. So they could do stones, they could do arrows, and they were ambidextrous. They could do it with either the right or the left hand. But notice the last line, they were Saul's kinsmen from Benjamin. So it's striking that people are coming to join David when he's down with the Philistines, but it's even more striking that these are relatives to Saul, who are seeing an issue between Saul and David, and they're choosing David. Now, we see this in verses 1 through 7, these men who came from Saul's relatives from Benjamin. Verses 8 through 15 is going to contrast that or compare it. It's another group. It's going to be men who came from Gad on the east side of the Jordan. We'll look at a map in just a second. Notice these that we've just looked at, they were trained in the bow and in sling with right and left hand. The ones that we're going to read about next are trained in the use of the spear and the shield. So notice you've got I guess you could call the first group the artillery, and the second group the infantry. The folks that sort of fight head on, face to face. Let's look at that, verse 8. From the Gadites there came over to David in the stronghold in the wilderness. By the way, that word stronghold, Matsuda, is where we get our word Masada from. But there came over to David in the stronghold in the wilderness mighty men of valor, men trained for war, who could handle shield and spear, and whose faces were like the faces of lions. They had a fierce countenance. They could put on their war face, and they were swift as the gazelles on the mountains. So not only did they exhibit the countenance, presumably the strength of lions, but the speed of gazelles. These folks, these were special forces. Verse 14, these of the sons of Gad were captains of the army. He who was least was equal to 100, and the greatest to 1,000. So they were extremely valuable. These sons of Gad were elite forces. Verse 15, these are the ones who crossed the Jordan in the first month when it was overflowing all its banks. Now notice you see the Sea of Galilee in the north and the Jordan River connecting the Sea of Galilee with the Dead Sea in the south. And in the first month, that would be the first month wouldn't be January, it would be more closer to March. Their religious year starts a little bit later than ours. And that's the time of the year when the snows on Mount Hermon are beginning to melt somewhat. They don't all melt, but quite a few of them do. That's also your rainy season, and as a result of that, the melting snow and the rain, the Jordan River overflows its banks. That's the same time of year. Remember that Joshua had come into the promised land, and God had supernaturally held up I mean, maybe he used a natural means, but the timing was certainly supernatural, where he had caused the Jordan River to stop its flow. Well, here, God's not stopping its flow, but that doesn't stop them. They crossed the Jordan at that time when the Jordan was overflowing all its banks. And they do this to put to flight all those in the valleys, both to the east and to the west. And so they come on the scene, and they're going back and forth across the Jordan, and they're winning battles, and people are running away from them. So we have, first of all, those that came from Saul's relatives, then the men who came from Gad on the east side of the Jordan. Next, we have a mixed group from Benjamin and Judah. And in this case, David's actually going to ask them, he's going to ask them some very pointed questions about where is their loyalty. Verse 16, then some of the sons of Benjamin and Judah came to the stronghold to David. Now, we're not sure which stronghold this was, but a lot of the strongholds tended to be in the wilderness areas down as you move toward the Dead Sea. And we already mentioned that word stronghold is actually used to describe one particular stronghold much later on, and that's the stronghold of it's the stronghold of the stronghold, but actually the Hebrew word there is Masada. Well, verse 17, David went out to meet them and said to them, if you come peacefully, I want you to know this is the two if clauses. If you come in peace to me to help me, my heart will be united with you. You know, if we're going to be at peace, then we're going to be great buddies. But if to betray me to my adversaries, that's going to be another story. Since there is no wrong in my hands, may the God of our fathers look on it and decide. David says, I can't tell, but God can tell, and may God decide, because I'm not at war with, I haven't been trying to attack Saul. He's been trying to attack me. I haven't been trying to attack Saul. And if you're coming to try to betray me, then may God deal with you accordingly. Verse 18, now notice the answer to this. Then the Spirit came upon Amasai, who was the chief of the 30, of this group that was coming down. By the way, when it says the Spirit came upon him, literally, the Spirit clothed Amasai. It's interesting that phrase, describing it to clothe someone, that's actually used once earlier, Gideon. Now, there are a number of times where we see the Spirit came upon somebody, but to use this particular phrase where the Spirit clothes someone, that same exact phrase is used to describe what God did in coming upon Gideon. And it's going to be used again here in Chronicles, in 2 Chronicles chapter 24, when Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada, he will be both a priest but also a prophet, and he's going to get up and prophesy, and as a result, they're actually going to kill him. But we have these three instances, and this is one of them, those instances where the Spirit clothes him, and it reminds us that we have been clothed by the Spirit. We're to put on Christ. Well, notice what he said. We are yours, O David, and with you, O son of Jesse. Notice how this is almost like a song, and it's in parallelism. We're O David, O son of Jesse. That's speaking about the same person. We are yours. We are with you. And then notice the next line: peace to you, and peace to him who helps you. So notice they are giving a blessing of peace upon David, but also upon anybody who joins themselves, and they want to join with David because they want that blessing for themselves. And then he finishes, indeed, your God helps you. And so we have recognized that God is helping you. So we want to be close to the person that God is blessing, because we want some of that blessing for ourselves. Frankly, I think they have a little bit of a vested interest, but that's the kind of vested interest I think we're supposed to have. You see, coming to the Lord is a great blessing. And so you come to him, yes, for his glory and honor, but also because you have a vested interest, because it's good for you to be close to the Lord. And then we read, and David received them and made them captains of the band. So they become part of this growing community. Now, I want you to notice, by becoming captains of the band, this lets us know they were gifted. And when I say gifted, they had ability with respect to leadership and command. But what was required wasn't just their giftedness. What was required was their faithfulness. You see, I've seen times where a Christian leader was very, very gifted, but was not faithful. And giftedness is no substitute for faithfulness. God uses faithful people. He gifts faithful people. But sometimes somebody can be gifted and not have that quality of faithfulness, and that excludes them. And it's a necessary exclusivity that takes place. All right, we've already seen the men who came from Saul's relatives. We saw the men who came from Gad across the Jordan. We saw this mixed group from Benjamin and Judah. And now we see men from Manasseh. This is one of the tribes. Manasseh had been, remember, one of the sons of Joseph. So it's one of the tribes. And actually, there were people from Manasseh on both sides of the Jordan River. Remember that it was Reuben, Gad, and half a tribe of Manasseh who settled on the east side, and then others had settled on the west side. And you say, well, which one is this? We're not told. But they're going to join with David at the time when David has to fight the raiders who had come up against Ziklag. We'll look at that right now. Here it is, verse 19. From Manasseh also, some defected to David when he was about to go to battle with the Philistines against Saul. Remember how the Philistines, who lived along the coast, were going up to that Jezreel Valley, and Saul was on the southern portion of that valley. And so the Philistines are going to take up arms. They're going to find themselves on the valley, and they're going to fight Saul. And so that's where Saul is going to be killed. But notice it, but they did not help them, for the lords of the Philistines, after consultation, sent David away, saying, at the cost of our heads, he may defect to his master Saul. Now, that's a story we've already read about at the end of 1 Samuel. So this is alluding to it. It's not telling the entire story, but it's sort of filling us in, reminding us of that story. As he went to Ziklag, remember how they sent David home back to the city that he'd been given, back to Ziklag. They defected to him from Manasseh, and these are the people that came: Adnah, Jozabad, Jediael, Michael, Jozabad, Elihu, and Zilithai, captains of thousands who belonged to Manasseh. So these leaders from the tribe of Manasseh come over to David, only to find that David's not really going to be in the battle with the Philistines against Saul. Now notice what they've done. They've defected to be on David's side against Saul. But now David is removed from that battle. He's sent back home to Ziklag. And in verse 21, they help David against the band of raiders. Remember the story at the end of 1 Samuel, where he comes back to Ziklag only to find out that Ziklag has been captured and sacked, and its inhabitants taken away into slavery by the Amalekites. And so David and these, along with these people from Manasseh, these leaders, they join up with him, and they help David against the band of raiders. For they were all mighty men of valor and were captains in the army. And remember how the rest of the story, where they go down, they catch up with the Amalekites after a 3-day chase, and they attack them, and they rescue all their people, and they come back to Ziklag. And it's a great story. Verse 22, for day by day men came to David to help him until there was a great army like the army of God. And I want you to see what's happening. We've had these 4 different occasions where people are coming over to David, sometimes people that you would not expect to be on David's side, but they're coming over to David's side, and his army is growing. And so you see, David, notice how I'm calling him David, the rejected Messiah. The word Messiah means the anointed one. David had been anointed by Samuel, And he's gradually, it didn't happen all at once, but he's gradually being recognized by a growing army that is getting bigger and bigger. And some of that was taking place back in the days when Saul was around, and some of that is going to take place even now that Saul's dead. And of course, this reminds us of Jesus, the rejected Messiah, who is also, from our perspective, is gradually being recognized over the last 2,000 years by a church that is growing and growing and growing, by a spiritual army of God. And that army is continuing to grow. Not that we're going out with swords and spears and stones and things like that, but rather we are using spiritual weapons, the weapons of love and truth and faith and patience, the lessons, the weapons of the Word of God. And we are fighting a spiritual battle in which we are conquering the enemy and taking captives and having those captives join the ranks of this growing army. Because, like I said, it's a spiritual battle. When I take somebody captive, that's not for their bad, that's actually for their good, as they come and be part of God's kingdom. Verse 38, all these, being men of war who could draw up in battle formation, came to Hebron. Now this is taking place now, and we've just jumped forward, not just past the death of Saul, but we've jumped forward 7 years, where David had ruled in Hebron over just the tribe of Judah. He'd been sort of a tribal leader for a time. But now all of these, this army's been growing over the years, came to Hebron with a perfect heart to make David king over all Israel. And all the rest also of Israel were of one mind to make David king. Notice the unity where there had been division before. Now there is coming to be a unity, as they are like the army of God, and they're coming together. Verse 39, they were there, and we have a listing of all the people. I'm not going to read all those names and numbers and so on, but they were there with David 3 days, eating and drinking, for their kinsmen had prepared for them. Moreover, those who were near to them, even as far as Issachar and Zebulun, that's way up in the region of Galilee, and Naphtali, brought food on donkeys, camels, mules, and on oxen, great quantities of flour cakes, fig cakes, and bunches of raisins, wine, oil, oxen, and sheep. And there was joy indeed in Israel. And what's taking place, and notice it takes place over a 3-day period, reminds me again of how there was 3 days where the Messiah was in the heart of the earth. But now that he has risen from the dead, there is not sorrow, but now there is rejoicing, and a rejoicing that calls all Christians to come and to eat and drink at his table. In fact, to eat and drink, no, spiritually, not physically, but to eat and drink of him. Remember what Jesus said, one must eat my body and drink my blood. Now that's not literal, but that's figurative and spiritual. But we partake of him through faith. And when we do that, there is rejoicing and there is oneness and unity as we join ourselves to the Lord.